Good morning or afternoon or evening all, depending on where you're listening to us from. Welcome to another Condal webinar. This one's slightly different from the series we've been running on sustainability. This one is particularly on, it's called Getting Back to Work, but really I guess we should call it Getting Back to the Workplace, because most people have been working and very successfully from the place where they normally live all over the world. I'm Thomas Neeson, I'm Managing Partner at Condal, and I bring today to you two speakers who are experts in their field and will get us through the first part of getting back to the workplace, which is the part from leaving your home to getting to your office or place of work. We obviously meet in really challenging times through the COVID crisis. We're now in week 7, 8, 9, 10, depending on where you're at in the world. And people are starting to figure out what it might look like in a post-COVID world. And we're here to help guide people as to how we best navigate that and how we do it in a sustainable manner as well as a safe manner going forward. Our today's seminar is about 30 minutes of presentation. Valeria and Graham are trying to pump as much knowledge as possible into in as short a time as possible. So there'll be lots of slides. You may have lots of questions. We've got a Q&A box on the right-hand side of the screen and a chat box, so please raise your questions. And also, if you've got thoughts and ideas, put those forward to us as well. We're all here to learn, to pick something up. We can learn from you, and hopefully you can learn something from us. If we don't get through all of the queries in the allocated time, we will email you with answers after the webinar. So on to our speakers today. You can see them on screen. So we've got Valeria Riso. Valeria is a transport planner with 15 years experience in the transport sector, looking at traffic engineering, sustainable transport solutions, and that's particularly important in the world going forward. I think we'll see a lot more of this becoming front and center of everything that we do in planning urban spaces and master planning. Valeria is also an expert at visualizing what transport can look like, people flow and vehicle flow, using micro-simulation, and we'll probably be demonstrating some of that in our talk today. Graham Barker heads up our global vertical transportation division. That's lifts and escalator consultancy all around the world, and Graham's got over 20 years experience in advising people on the best ways to get up and down buildings. So without further delay, I'm going to hand you over to Valeria and Graham, and hopefully we shall see you next week for part 2 of the Returning to the Workplace webinar. So thank you, and on to Valeria.
Thanks, Thomas. Okay, so like the title says, in this webinar, we are going to consider the journey back to work post-lockdown, with a focus on the impacts on transportation and access within the building. Just before starting, a very brief introduction to our company. Condal is a multidisciplinary consultancy established over 40 years ago and currently operating from over 20 locations across the globe. With regard to the latest updates on the topic, last Sunday, the UK Prime Minister announced his plans to ease the lockdown restrictions in England, including 3 different steps. With regard specifically to going back to work, it was announced that from Wednesday, tomorrow, people in England who can work from home will be actively encouraged to go to work, but they should still avoid public transport if possible because of social distancing. Also, last night, the government published a guidance on working safely during COVID-19. But if we go back to analyze the impact of the lockdown on transportation, the graph in this slide indicates that transport use is down by at least 50% for all transport types since February. The graph also indicates that the reduction actually started before the lockdown, and also motor vehicles usage has increased over the last week. So whatever the outcome of the next stage will be, the next step will be, we will continue to see impacts on transportation in the short and medium terms, with potentially long-term changes in travel habits as part of the new normal. So for this webinar, I would like to go through some of these short, medium, and long-term changes with the focus on the modes of transport currently used by commuters. So if we start with the private car, as I said, we are currently seeing traffic at its lower levels, with private car use reduced by approximately 90%. Transport policies have been aiming at reducing the car dependency for quite some time, but we might see a jump in solo car journeys from now on, both because of the government announcement of not using public transport, but rather the car, and also because people might perceive this as being a safer travel option for social distancing, which will negatively impact on traffic congestion, parking, and air quality. Let's see, where did I start? Reallocating the road space for cycling, walking is the best solution in the short to medium term, and I'll also expand on this later because it would enable the streetscape to be improved. The videos in these slides are from one of our projects prior COVID-19, where the image on the left shows the existing road infrastructure, including 3 lanes plus an advisory cycle lane and a narrow pavement, while the image on the right shows the proposal, including removing the near side lane and using that space to widen the pavement. In particular, this study demonstrated that the proposal would not significantly increase the level of existing delays already experienced by drivers traveling through the area, but it would bring a greater benefit to walking, and in a current COVID-19 scenario, would also allow social distancing. So I think it would be crucial to monitor and review any temporary changes that will be made to assess the feasibility in the long term. Just wanted to make a comment about the videos because of the resolution of all the videos shown in this webinar has been affected by the use of Zoom, but the webinar will be uploaded on YouTube so that from there every video should be running smoothly. So if we continue our journey to work, looking at the different modes, public transport. As I mentioned, currently we are seeing public transport use reduced by 95%. This slide shows 2 photos I have taken of 2 stations, train station in central London. London Bridge, 11 days before the lockdown, and then Blackfriars Station, 4 days before lockdown. Obviously, the difference is quite clear. The main impact on social distancing on public transport would be, I think, on capacity, space, and time. So capacity, why capacity? Because the need for social distancing would obviously reduce the vehicle's capacity. For instance, in London, the total carrying capacity of the tube could be reduced to between 13 to 20% of the pre-crisis levels, even by having 100% of trains running. And the carriage capacity of double-decker buses could be reduced from 85 passengers to about 15. Therefore, more services will need to be provided alongside providing services, for instance, only catering for demand from certain stops along the same route to give passengers located, for example, towards the end of a route, a chance to use the service. Impact on space, because bus stops, train, tube platform would be impacted by the space needed for queuing for the services, as well as providing enough space for others to safely walk past while social distancing. Also on time, for instance, terminal buildings, interchange, would additionally be impacted by increasing timing for access, egress, boarding, highlighting, etc., with every activity taking longer than before because of the need of social distancing. So some of short to medium term solution would include the use of screens to increase capacity within vehicles, space allocation aimed at increasing capacity within the space available, one-way circulation, booking-only services, also mobile apps that could give live information on existing queues at stop or advising on a quieter time to travel, the removal of gates, introduction of online payment only, staggering daily start, finish timing for activities such as work and or stagger the need for traveling to work to days or weeks on and week off, etc. So going back to the video that has been running on this slide is, again, from one on our model where we have assessed a train station scenario and the impact of social distancing with and without space allocation for queuing to identify the high density walkways and the pinch points. So in the space on the left, people distance themselves wherever possible, while in the space to the right, people always obey the 2 meters distance rule. So people are also color-coded based on their experience density, which in simple words indicates how distant people are from each other, with the blue indicating that the 2 meters distance rule is respected, and anything different from the blue is when this rule is breached, with congestion starting from the color yellow. So we saw that it's not possible to maintain social distancing in open spaces unless people are guided to follow a specific path or queue. With the free movement, so the left in the video, the high density spaces would be the stairs, with pinch points happening at the entrance, at the gates, at the platforms while boarding the train. Within the queue scenario, the one in the right in the video, the social distance has been respected. However, the access rate to the station is much lower when compared to the scenario to the left, which implies that people must be able to queue outside of the station. And it also shows that less people are able to actually reach the platform and board the train, which obviously impacts on train times. So going back to impact, the current experience on home working and the use of technology such as video conferencing, webinar, to replace the need for work may see new and different travel patterns develop in the long term. So if we carry on and look at a third mode, cycling and walking. So currently there has been a high increase in walking and cycling. And in the short term, this trend is forecasted to be maintained. As mentioned, we have seen a number of schemes and initiatives launched by different cities in different countries. For example, I'm only bringing a few examples. In Berlin, cycle lanes have been extended or new have been created to balance the reduction with public transport services, and where the road space has been taken from motorized lanes. In Paris, the mayor announced that 50 kilometers of lanes normally used by cars would be reserved for bicycles following the end of the lockdown, with additional 30 streets made pedestrian only, in particular around school. In Milan, Milan announced that 35 kilometers of street will be transformed over this summer with an experimental citywide expansion of cycling and walking space to protect the people during their current stage 2, where COVID-19 restrictions have already been lifted. In the UK, in England, in particular, plans to promote active transport were launched on the 9th of May, including pop-up bikes, lanes with protected space for cycling, wider pavements, safer junctions, cycle and bus-only corridors to be created within weeks. The plan also included e-scooter trials to be brought forward from next year to next month, and use the technology to help ease the overcrowding on public transport. In London, also a new street space plan was launched by the mayor, including, again, pavement widening, temporary cycle lanes, but in particular, a new cycle route above tube routes. So with regard in particular to walking, in the model shown in this video, we have assessed the impact of social distancing on walking behavior. In this particular video, we have considered 2 one-way sections, which are the one at the back of the video, and 1 two-way sections, where the two-way sections is twice as wide as the one-way sections and include the sum of the people of the 2 one-way sections. So in short, the assessment indicated that while some initial and only local congestion would be experienced within the one-way section, till the movement of people settles to a situation where everyone walks at a distance of 2 meters, the two-way section actually experiences a situation of high congestions and breach of the 2 meters distance rule, which extend for a much longer period of time when compared to the one-way section. After assessing after assessing how our journey back to the office building could look like, I will hand it over to Graham, who will look at the impacts within the office building.
Thanks, Valeria. So, every building's different, and in order to produce this webinar today, we needed to base it around something to assist with our thought processes and the considerations when regarding a specific building. So we've chosen this example building. It's a fairly typical multi-tenanted office building. It's got a single main reception and entrance at the ground floor, and it's got offices provided at ground floor and at the 5th floor. On the 5 floors above. We see here that the main building entrance with the usual routes through the revolving door, through the speed gates and into the lift lobby. Lifts are the primary route to all above ground floors. There are stairs within the building, but these are very much back of house. There's no direct route from the main lobby to those stairs. And prior to the current crisis, those stairs were not used for people movement within the building. The speed gates are the secure line, and like many buildings, the lifts have been upgraded in recent years to a destination control system to improve the lift service in an age of increased occupation density. And what we've seen over the last 15, 20 years is that the population of offices, the density of offices becoming greater, they're becoming more reliant on lifts to get people to their offices and their desks reliably. And that's going to have a negative impact as we move forward because of the density that we've put into our office spaces. Here we see the usual route into the building pre-Covid-19, where people are passed through the speed gates and then congregate in the lift lobby awaiting their lift. So when we're thinking about the reoccupation of the building, some of the things that we're likely to need to consider are going to be the access, the building and tenant security, fire doors. Leaving doors open might be one strategy, but can we do so? Coupled with that concept of potentially leaving doors open, the internal environment regulation, what's that going to do to heat, noise, air quality? Obviously the segregation and social distancing requirements and the potential for transfer of virus via contact services. In today's webinar, we're not going to focus on the people side of accessing, in today's webinar, we're going to focus on the people side of accessing the building. But the lifts and escalators obviously need to be operational prior to building occupation. It's not the focus of this webinar, but there is a blog on it at cundleconversations.com if you want to get some further guidance on getting your lifts and escalators up and running, ready for people to approach your building. Just picking up on escalators, we saw them in Valeria's graphic earlier at the station. Our example building doesn't have any escalators, but many buildings do. As we saw in the graphic Valeria showed us earlier, the constant speed of an escalator will maintain social distancing if people are distanced when they board. Yeah, so as long as they're at the queue is managed to the escalator, the people are boarding at currently a 2 meter in the UK distance, then that will be maintained throughout their journey on the escalator as long as people don't accelerate. Couple of key things to consider. Don't attach anything to escalator steps or handrails without special advice and the involvement of your maintenance provider. The last thing that we want to do is put tape or anything of that nature on an escalator to promote social distancing, because the likelihood it's going to damage it. The handrail cleaning regime is the primary consideration on escalators. And really needs to probably be a risk assessment carried out to assess the use of the escalator versus alternative means, if there are any available. What we absolutely shouldn't do is suggest to people that they don't hold the escalator handrail. There'll be a potential aversion to making contact with the handrail, but that introduces quite significant health and safety issues, and people falling down escalators is unfortunately a regular occurrence where they don't hold the handrail and leads to some very nasty physical injuries. Final thing to consider on escalators is that static escalators also shouldn't be used as staircases. So again, it needs to be part of that risk assessment about what is the best route into the building. The final point on this, there's lots of potentially miracle products on the market. You really need to investigate them. I'm sure not just in our field, but across all areas of our lives at the minute, people are trying to promote their products that are the best thing since sliced bread and solve all of our world problems. Do the detailed analysis and read the label, because not everything is quite as valuable as the sales blurb would suggest to you. So coming back to our example building, our building's got 4 lifts. The 1,250 kilos or 16-person lifts. And as I'm sure you've probably noticed yourself, if it says 16 people, it probably doesn't look like it'll fit 16 people in it. And that isn't the realistic number of people that the lift could carry. Lift occupancy is calculated based on the area taken by a person. So in this case, a 16-person lift would be expected to take a maximum of 10 people. Yeah. Passenger arrival in the morning would typically be spread over around about an hour, with a peak in the middle. And these charts show that under normal circumstances, the lift system is well designed, handles the traffic with minimal waiting times and short queues of people awaiting the next lift. Even at the peak time, we've got no more than 16 people waiting for a lift. In Sunday's broadcast, Boris Johnson in the UK talked about a 3-step plan. Step 3 being the return of hospitality at the earliest date of the 1st of July. And during all 3 of his steps, that social distancing rules would need to be maintained and enforced. So I suspect we might see some further guidance in the coming days on that, but that some level of social distancing will be needed in lifts, and likely some suitable signage, including potentially indicating which direction people should be facing and what PPE they may need to be wearing. But if we look at a couple of different scenarios to see what the impact could be based on doing nothing. So we'll keep accessing our building through the usual route, and we'll just apply the social distancing measures. So a 2-meter social distancing rule will, in most cases, mean only 1 person traveling in a lift. So if we operate as before, full building occupation, access to the building via the lifts, we'll develop a queue of around 650 people in the morning. So in our 2-meter spaced queue, that queue is now 1.3 kilometers long, which might be a challenge in terms of locating it on the exterior of the building. And for the people that arrive, around about 9:30, it'll be gone 2 o'clock in the afternoon before they actually get through the lift system and up to their desk. Obviously, this isn't a realistic option, and but it helps us to understand the size of the problem that we face. Perhaps we might envisage, with the use of PPE, that the social distancing measures maybe could be relaxed in lifts, and we could have 4 people in a lift, so 1 in each corner perhaps. This obviously helps us move people into the building more quickly, but it still results in long queues and queuing times. We still get a queue of around about 300 people at the peak time, and a waiting time of around about 40 minutes just to access the building. So we need to think and act differently. Yeah. Can the stairs be used, I think, is going to be the fundamental question that most buildings are going to be looking at. What volume of people need to use the lifts? what volume could use the stairs. Many of us use the lifts out of either building arrangement or through convenience, but how many of us actually need to use the lifts? How many could take the stairs? Could we reduce the building occupancy? Could we spread the peak arrival and exit times through staggered start times or shifts? Each building is different and will need to be assessed to consider what works for them. I think the added complication in our example building as a multi-tenanted building is that there's going to be a need to not only develop your own business plans, but to coordinate with the other businesses within your building to develop an overall building strategy. Because there's no point that with one tenant coming up with the best plan in the world if another tenant is just planning for everybody to turn up at 9 o'clock and hope for the best. So looking again at our example building, we need as many people as possible to use the stairs, and there is an emergency stair accessible from the ground floor. Could we use a second stair for downward travel? We've got a challenge in this building that the other stairs within the building don't exit at ground. Or perhaps we'd need to manage a one-way system on a single staircase. Both these things need to be assessed and management processes need to be put in place. And queues are likely to develop at the base of the stairs and again will need to be managed. Building and individual tenant security and access controls are unlikely to be prepared for accessing via this back of house staircase. So the security considerations also need to be considered. Are we going to have some kind of security guard checking in type, or maybe even a list of names to be ticked off at that what is back of house door? When we come back to the lift lobby, there will still be people that need to use the lifts, and we need to consider the different traffic flows. So we're likely to have incoming tenants. They're also likely to need a route that's going to allow a queue to form and some form of segregation from the people that are exiting. There's obviously the people exiting the building, and there's also provisions needed for deliveries and visitors. I would think that one of the questions that many businesses will be looking at is actually, can I prioritise my staff and perhaps limit my deliveries and visitors? And building management staff will be needed to marshal the different flows and likely control building security, because personally I think it's going to be impractical to continue using the speed gates where you've got queues effectively forming through them. So now we've sorted out our access routes and flow of people, we also need to think about contact surfaces. And there are lots of contact surfaces on the way to our workplaces. I won't go through them all. Fundamentally, we need to minimize contact surfaces. Can doors be wedged open so that people don't need to touch them? Can we provide hand cleaning facilities, hand sanitizer? But I think the location of those facilities is going to be absolutely key. In our graphic here, we've placed a hand sanitizer station at the entry door to the building. It's likely that whilst people were stood in the queue, they'd immediately recontaminate their hands by getting their phones out of the pockets to check their emails, Facebook, etc. And aside from individual hand sanitization and cleaning, the whole building is needs to be supported by suitable cleaning regimes, particularly for high contact surfaces. So coming back to the lifts, typically lift surfaces are stainless steel and plastic, and have around about a 2 to 3 day stay alive period for the virus if uncleaned. And so each building is going to need to be individually assessed. The use of an implement perhaps to contact surfaces is likely to need to be perhaps disposable. Any implement that you use to press buttons in this example would, after several uses, become dirty, and then it would just be transferring the virus in a similar way to that your hand would. Wherever possible, we need to look to remove contact surfaces. And perhaps a single member of building staff operating lift buttons, opening doors, would enable building users to pass through without contacting and remove the possibility of transfer between people. So a little bit of a lift education for those that don't know. There are two main types of lift controls. Conventional, you press the button on the landing, the lift arrives, you get in the lift and you press the button to tell it where you want to go. The image is on the left. And destination control, where you tell the lift where you want to go at the landing before you get into the car. So that's the image on the right. The reason for explaining those is because depending on your lift system, you're going to need a slightly different strategy for the operation of your lifts. So on a conventional, we've got two contact points effectively. We need to press the button in the lobby, we need to press the button in the car. The alternative would be to get the security or building management team to do the lift operations. So they press the call button in the lobby, lift arrives, they check the lift's empty. We don't want people accessing lifts that have already got people in them before they've had a chance to leave. The security person presses the button in the lift car to indicate where the occupier is going to. And then that person comes forward into the lobby, enters the lifts, and travels to their floor without needing to contact any of the lift buttons. The other facility that gives is that enables the security team to manually manage the number of passengers entering the lift and effectively to marshal the whole operation. It is possible to make some reprogrammings to the lift to adjust weight limits. That needs to be considered with your lift provider, and also in regard to any deliveries, because that may affect your delivery strategy. Destination control system, simpler scenario, because we've just got the single contact point. The floor selection's made at the lobby before entering the lift. So again, security would, in this case, press the button for the user, again would check that the lift is empty, passenger enters the lift, travels to their floor. The destination control system does allow much greater control over how the lifts will operate, and can even be programmed to manage the number of people allowed to travel in the lifts in order to achieve the social distancing requirements. So again, if you've got a destination control system within your building, you've probably got the opportunity to put more hard-coded solutions in place regarding your lifts with the assistance of your lift company. It's important to consider the complete building operation over the full working day. Some buildings might have shared facilities between tenants, toilets, kitchens. We also need to think about people perhaps leaving the building at lunch breaks, leaving at the end of the day. I don't think any of us really know how long some of these measures may remain in place. And it might be worth considering, making some more permanent building modifications. But it's important to assess each building individually, the occupancy mix, and how the building can operate. As I said before with the escalators, there's lots of new miracle projects. Some of them are very, very good. Yeah. One of the ones I like in this image is actually a foot-operated set of buttons for the lifts, which would mean using your shoe as the contact point. But I think the key thing is to get some advice and don't jump into making significant spends on your equipment without having a level of certainty that investment is going to be valuable. So over to Valeria.
Yeah, so just to conclude this webinar, this final model shows how we can assess the impacts of social distancing on accessing a building. Okay, again, apologies for the resolutions. So we have used the building in question that Graham was talking about. So first we have assessed both the indoor and outdoor spaces and established circulation paths to control movement flows and to ensure the 2 meters distance can be respected. Then we have separated in and out flows and assigned dedicated spaces to each movement, including dedicated doors and dedicated lifts. For instance, we've assumed that the lift to the left are used for taking people down only, and the lift to the right are used for taking people up only. So basically, given predetermined inputs, such as the number of people arriving, their paths to the building, and their arrival time distribution, the use of the model would allow us to identify, above all, the extent of the queue outside of the building, the timing for entering the building from joining the queue, or basically the time spent on each area of the model, the impact of a one-way system, the impact of two-way system, high density areas, the pinch points within each area of the model, how successful a strategy could be and what improvements are needed. And basically, all in all, it would allow assessing any strategy before a live implementation. So just in terms of, just to leave you with some final thoughts. With regard to transportation, as we have seen, social distance has an impact on space, time, and capacity. So therefore, any solution would need to be tailored to the particular case considered. While we will need to design for allowing a social distance, including physical measures such as, widening footways, providing more cycle lanes, identifying space for queuing, and also space for parking our bicycles to cater for the higher demand. We'll also need to consider how the new travel habits, including walking and cycling more, can help reduce the demand on public transport, and how the use of home working, staggering of activities, introduction of shifts can help reduce or spread the demand for movement over a longer period of time to increase the capacity of indoor and outdoor spaces needing to comply with social distancing.
Thanks. And I think fundamentally every building is different. Every building's operation is different. Just picking up on what Valeria said there about cycles and the increased volume of cycling. Over the last kind of 15, 20 years, we've seen cycle storage provisions go from pretty much zero to, even in the best, highest spec buildings that are being constructed today, that we're seeing kind of a 10% allowance for cycle storage. If 50-60% of the building's population decides to cycle to work, where are all these cycles actually going to go, and what's the security provisions for that equipment? In a similar way, if everybody's walking and it's raining, there's going to be coats and drying rooms and other facilities that might be requirements. I think the key to all of this is going to be the reduction in the volume of people accessing buildings, particularly with regard to lifts, needing lifts at key times, and applying the social distances. And it's an overall building strategy. In a multi-tenanted development or building, it's going to be key to work with your other tenants and the building management to agree strategies that work for all parties. Lots of products being offered in the market that could be potential solutions, but check they are. And Condor will be launching a guide later this week to provide some further impact assessment thoughts. So with that, I suppose thank you for your attention. I just signpost you to our second webinar next Monday, I think it is, focusing on how we can adapt our office spaces to ensure the health and well-being of staff when lockdown restrictions are lifted. And with that, I'll hand us back to Natalie.
Yeah, thank you both. We've had quite a few questions come through, so we'll just fly through those ones. The first one was probably a really great question, actually. What about in the case of emergency, so for a fire or the like? We saw on your pictures there, Graham, that you can't use the lifts in fires, obviously. So there's lots of discussion on how we get in and out at peak, but how we manage the emergency situations.
Sure. So I'm not a fire engineer, so I can't give you a definitive answer on that. But I'm sure I can put you in contact with some of my colleagues who can. From a personal perspective, if the building's on fire, I think the social distancing probably goes out the window, and getting out of the building becomes the primary focus. But
Okay.
we can pass you details of some of our colleagues on that one.
Yeah, we can do an assessment, but obviously you got to look at where the greater risk is. If the greater risk is from fire than from the potential to possibly pass on COVID, then I think obviously the priority will be life safety and get people out of the building. But it's a good point to raise, and when people are drawing up their plans for reoccupying their offices, then it should not be forgotten about or not included in anybody's thought process to make sure that you may need to have more fire marshals and better liaison with building management to make sure that your building is thought about it as well, to try and keep everybody as safe as possible.
Yep. Another one for you probably, Graham. So ventilation is suggested to be key to controlling the level of the virus. What solutions are there for lifts to increase ventilation and therefore dilution of air in the lift cars? So there seems to be quite a few products on the market that claim to sterilise or disinfect the air. Do you have any views on whether these will be of a benefit?
I've looked at a few of them. I think they probably do offer some benefit over not doing anything, shall we say. But the other facility that might be as valuable is most lifts can actually be parked, so when they're not in use, with the doors open, and then rather than having a fan forcing air into the lift car, you've got a 2 meter by 1 meter aperture that's probably going to allow more air to come through. I think there's still work to do in that area, but ventilation does seem to be one of the topics that might be a consideration for lifts, particularly in the future, because at the moment the ventilation levels that are in the standards are quite small.
Okay, thank you. So another one that's come through, another option to minimise or even eliminate contact points for the journey into a building is by using smart technology which can open doors automatically by knowing which floor you need to access. How available and feasible is this technology?
It's very available. It's very feasible. Is it feasible within a realistic timescale? I think is the question most people would need to ask, because in most cases you're going to need to physically install something that isn't there at the moment, which obviously goes through a design, procurement, installation type process. We're working on a building at the moment which does have seamless entry, from whether it's a tenant accessing the building using a card that gets you seamlessly through, or a visitor receiving a QR code before they even access the building, and that QR code getting them through the building. But that kind of solution needs to be thought about and developed to suit the building needs. So I think, yes, it's a solution. But I would suggest it's a longer term solution rather than an immediate one, and one that would probably be measured in months in terms of how long it takes to implement.
Brilliant, thank you. How do you see these people flow management issues impacting the viability of high-rise buildings in the future?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I see that question. From a Mr. Stratton who lives on the 32nd floor, I believe. So, he's going to get quite fit climbing the stairs, but it's a good point, isn't it? Obviously, land values and prices mean that building up makes good sense. But if you're building taller and taller and everybody's got to pass through one, that's the one pinch point, isn't it? Everybody has to get in the lifts. Once you go above practically 4 or 5 floors, people aren't really going to walk up a building.
Yeah, very much so. I think it might enter people's consideration more than it did 2 months ago, 3 months ago, something of that nature. I think in reality, we'll as a society, we'll find better ways that, I think we'll still continue to build tall. We'll just find solutions to deal with it.
Yeah, thank you. If you wanted to run an internal model, do you need a laser survey or specialist survey, or can you use a 2D CAD DWG plan?
So I guess that question is for me.
Yeah.
So in terms of no, you can use a 2D plan that is good enough. Obviously, you will need to have information to go with it in terms of the number of people, perhaps starting from the number of people that they would usually access that floor, and then starting to reducing it, considering the space available and the fact that they will need to comply with the 2 meters rules. And so basically, you can then use the model to assess your strategy. But yeah, a 2D plan would be good to start the model.
And from a lift perspective, the 2D plan would be suitable. You'd need some additional information, particularly around some specific information about the lifts, which would preferably be obtained through survey. But we have implemented solutions, kind of working with video calls with building management to talk them through obtaining the information where practically accessing a building hasn't been realistic for our surveyor.
Brilliant. And the final points, which are, I don't think necessarily questions, just more statements. So it seems like the most responsible thing is that organisations that have people in offices recommend their staff to continue to manage to work from home. This keeps demand of stretched public transport down for the essential workers. And going back to the topic of taller buildings, in Hong Kong, lift buttons are almost always covered in plastic film that is regularly disinfected by the building management every hour or so. So they're another consideration for what we might do for the taller buildings.
Yeah, well, what was just on that, because we do see that in different parts of the world, and I think typically what I'm seeing is a regular cleaning regime of contact points. So in many cases, hourly cleaning of contact points, and then more increased cleaning, maybe daily cleaning of all other general non-contact surfaces. So your cleaning regime, it's all part of risk assessment. So what is, if you clean it once an hour versus once a day, how does that vary the risk of exposure to your employees? Unless you are going to clean a contact surface between every single use, there is a likelihood to pass things on through contact. But how can we minimise or mitigate that risk through cleaning strategies?
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. That's the last of the questions. If you have got anything else that you'd like to add, obviously Graham and Valeria's details are on the screen there. If not, I'll just...
You haven't answered my question.
Oh, sorry.
So Graham, 16 people lifts. Have you ever tried to get 16 people into a 16-person lift? I said earlier, they're not really designed for that, so why are they labelled?
Because they're labelled based on the load capacity, and that a person weighs a particular amount. I'm sure there are many students around the world that have successfully managed to get the right number of people in a lift. I do remember that when I was at University in Newcastle many years ago, some students managed to get a cow in the lift, but I don't think there was any cow rating.
It's not on the label. Yeah.
I'm pleased we've cleared that one up.
I'm glad you have, yeah.
So thank you to the speakers. Thank you, Thomas, Valeria and Graham. And as Graham mentioned earlier, we have got the second part of this webinar, which is with Curtis, Kavita and Ed on the sustainability aspect. So we're looking at air quality, ventilation strategies, indoor environmental monitoring. So if you haven't signed up for that, that's next Monday, the same time at 8:30 UK.
Thank you so many for coming along and attending our webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day. Stay safe.
Cheers. Bye.